A couple of people have asked me if there isn't some easy way to put these gaskets, get these gaskets back aligned and get all of the pieces of this universal put back together, once it's done. What I do is I simply take broken pieces of toothpick and I put them in there, and then I add the pieces. Add the pieces in, just lining them up with the toothpicks. You can't see what I'm doing on this end over here, but what I'm doing is I'm lining up the toothpicks with the holes. You'll see when I get there. That noise you hear in the background is my dog chewing on a bone. Now, if I was really smart, what I'd do is I'd have all of these, I'll try to ease by here, I'd have all of these toothpicks exactly the same size, and it would make it a little bit easier to get them all into the holes. And then I sort of wiggle everything around and sort of check the holes in here. Make sure everything's nice and neat, and also check the edges of the gasket on the outside here. See if I can get over where I'm in frame here. Check it on the outside to make sure that it's even. Make sure that there's an even amount on both sides. And actually, once I get the screws in, the screws are fatter than the toothpicks, and you'll see that in a moment. Of course, I've made sure that all of these pieces are nice and clean before I started. The manufacturers sometimes used a very, very thin adhesive to hold the gasket in place. I guess they thought that it was easier to kind of glue the gasket in place instead of going through an alignment like what I do. So they would just place the gasket, put a very thin adhesive. I don't know what they used, but some sort of a very thin adhesive just to hold the gasket in place. It's probably a little bit faster than what I do. I try to be very careful to make sure there isn't any debris on anything, and keep a close eye on all of the pieces. Sorry if my head gets in the way here. Making sure that all of the valves, what I'm doing now is I'm checking to make sure that all the valves are down, which indicates that the pouches underneath are not lifting them up. If one of these valves wasn't resting firmly on its seat, that would indicate that the pouch was pushing up on the bottom of it, pushing up on the bottom of the pusher. Is what the pusher looks like. That's underneath there, pusher, and the pouch, of course, is underneath there. And of course, if see if I get into frame here, I don't know why I'm pointed way over here. Let me reposition this a little bit. So you make sure that all of the valves are down. This is the pusher, and of course the pouch is underneath here. And you know, if the pouch was pushing up on the pusher even a little bit, it would cause this valve to be off of its seat, and you'd be able to see that when you look at all of these in the row here. Be able to see one that was sticking up a little bit. I try to do this in a bright light so that I can see little pieces of dust or something like that that might be on these pieces. It really doesn't take much. I mean, I don't have a what do they call that? A hermetically sealed room to do this job in, so it's blowing that you hear as I'm always blowing things off just to make sure. I mean, of course, I've checked everything to make sure that it's as clean as I could get it. I use acetone to do the cleaning. Right now, you have to put this, I don't know if you'll be able to see this as I'm doing it, but you have to put this in an angle. And you have to make sure you keep putting back bottom pressure on it as you're doing this. Sometimes it can get a little frustrating when you can't get the toothpick to line up with the hole. I'm struggling right now with one. It's giving me a hard time. There it goes. There might be a better way to do this. I struggled with this originally when I first started working on these and trying to get all of these pieces all lined up. And this is what I came up with as the easiest way to do the job. I have to get over on this other side here. Ugh. Okay, now everything's down in place, and I'm going to start in the center here so that you can see what I do. But what I do is I take this and I round it like that. That sort of gets everything all lined up. And I take one out, put the screw in by hand, and the next one, and then go back. And actually normally I start dead in the center, because I don't have the camera set up for that. But what I do is I start in the center and then I move back and forth in each direction, very much similar to the way that you'd put the bolts on a head gasket or something like that, you know, if you're doing a car. Start in the center and move out. And then after I get all of these turned in one or two turns, then what I do is I just kind of shake everything. After I get all of the screws in. I sort of shake this whole piece back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and like this until everything just settles in. I mean, and it'll just of course there's a fair amount of movement right now, but after you get all of the screws in, there's actually very little movement of the whole piece, maybe a couple of thousandths of an inch. And so everything just gets nice and settled into place where it's very, very comfortable. And of course these screws do not get tightened. They just barely get snugged. One of the problems that I've heard about, although I've never, because I mean I learned about it at the factory, that you don't tighten these screws. They just get snugged, and they don't get snugged very tightly. In fact, you almost get the feeling that they're not tight enough. But the thing is that because of all of these rubber gaskets that you've got in here, if you were to tighten them, you actually collapse the gasket, squeeze the gasket down, and it changes the clearance for the valves, and that's not good. All of these pieces are very, very flat. The aluminum is very, very flat. The gaskets are very, very flat. And as a consequence of that, everything seals very, very well with virtually no pressure on the screws. So that's an important fact. You do not want to tighten the screws. I would say that if you were to measure that in inch pounds, it's probably like 1 or 2 inch pounds. You know, I don't know if I can demonstrate that. I'm just about done here, and I'll try to demonstrate. Okay, all of the screws are back in, and you see now that it's not moving at all. Okay, it doesn't move at all. And, get a screwdriver here, and here again, I mean, I'm going to do this the way that I normally do. I start at the center and move out, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, one side to another. And you might be able to see what I'm doing here. You notice that I'm not even twisting. I'm not even twisting on the top of the screwdriver. I'm just holding the shaft here. And I just back and forth and back and forth. Now, is it absolutely necessary to go back and forth like this? You know, I honestly don't know. It's just a practice that I developed as a child working with my father. I'm working on automobile engines, and it was something that he taught me, that this is the safest way to evenly distribute the pressure Um, that way the metal doesn't get twisted. Although I have to admit, you know, that as a youth I didn't understand the physics of what he was talking about. Later on in life, as people started explaining to me how forces work on metal and things of that nature, you know, I begin to understand how you could tighten something on one end and then tighten it all the way across, and by the time you got to the other end it was either stretched or bent or flexed unnaturally, and this assures that that doesn't happen. And that's all there is to it.